I'm so delighted you joined us to talk about implementing Better Futures Australia. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, where we're all located, and recognising their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and honour the core tenets of this connection. As the Aboriginal proverb says, we are all visitors to this time, this place. We are just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, to learn, to grow, to love, and then we return home. So hopefully we'll be here today to learn and to grow and to love before we go. My name is Caroline Pidcock. I was born in Grafton on the mighty Clarence River in the land of the 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗂𝗿 Nation. I grew up in Sydney around the harbour in the land of the 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝗂𝘁𝗂𝗿 and Gadigal people of the 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗂𝗁 Nation, where I'm calling in from today. My love for water and the bush can be attributed to the privilege I have enjoyed being connected to these places that have been so well cared for by our traditional custodians. I think and thank them every day. We live in incredible times. The evidence of climate and biodiversity emergency that is current is shaping all we do. It's clear that our old normal is not sustainable and not able to create the future we need. Australian Architects Declare is pleased to be part of the built environment sector of Better Futures Australia, which is bringing together all sectors and communities to build cross-sectoral networks and bridge the divides. We're doing this by showcasing individual and collaborative climate action so we can invite all Australians to see themselves delivering the real world opportunities and solutions. It's critical that we seize upon this unique moment in time to co-design climate action and joint advocacy plans that challenges Australian leaders to join. This will enable us to provide a platform all Australians can own to drive ambitious climate change together and flip the narrative. Together we can demonstrate society-wide action and support to drive momentum, which will leverage international pressure at COP26 at the end of next year to positively influence the Australian government to deliver credible long-term national climate policy. The co-conveners working behind the sector's working groups are doing an excellent job, and I would like to acknowledge and thank them for this. In particular, I'd like to thank Lisa Cliff. On Monday, Tom Rivard skillfully led us as we heard from 4 inspirational speakers, Alison Page, Amanda Sturgeon, Megan Sharkey and Mitchell Jokum, about the better futures we can imagine. On Wednesday, I brought together 3 more inspirational speakers, David Ness, Dylan Combermary and Hannah Corlett, to talk about how we are implementing better futures right now. Today, we are now bringing this together to talk about living better futures. To do this, we have 3 more super exciting speakers. We will then be discussing a collection of visionary concepts that point the way towards these radical destinies using the postcard from Utopia, describing transformational society changes that have been sent in. And so to our speakers. First up, we have Monica Richter. Monica is a Senior Manager of Low Carbon Futures at WWF Australia. She encourages positive change in corporate behaviour around climate and energy. She grew up in Brisbane and studied economics at Queensland Uni. She then worked in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for nearly 10 years and travelled the world. When she started studying a master's degree in social ecology, she realised her interest lay in the role of business being a better corporate citizen. Since then, she's worked in numerous environment NGOs and now at WWF, allowing her to drive positive change in corporate behaviour around climate and energy. I'm so looking forward to your contribution today, Monica. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Caroline, and hello to everybody here today. Lovely to be here on a Friday afternoon. I'm on the 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗂𝗿, 𝗂𝗂𝘁 and 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝗂𝗁 lands near Walleye Creek. So let me share the screen today. There we go. So I'm delighted to be involved in the Better Futures Alliance on behalf of WWF. I think the power of us collaborating and working together is really, really important at this time, because no single sector, no single person can deal with some of the major challenges we're facing. And of course, I think, you know, a few years ago, 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals together a plan, a global plan for how to make an ecologically sustainable and socially just future. And I really like these goals because it helps to identify what, you know, in really simple terms, what those 17 goals are. So WWF has a program called One Planet Cities, and it looks at cities from a systems point of view as closed systems, and identifies, well, you know, at the moment we're consuming globally 1.5 planets or more. In Australia, probably 3 times the planet's ability to restore its water and ecosystems for us to continue to use it. And it's a way for cities where over 50% of the world's population live to be a contributor to that. So I want to share a video about some of the work that we're doing in that global level.
Communities around the world are currently faced with a number of large-scale environmental challenges, including dangerous, irreversible climate change. Many of these challenges stem from cities and our resource-intensive urban lifestyles. Fortunately, an array of concrete solutions to these challenges are already being developed and implemented in cities around the globe. So we set off on an inspirational journey to explore the most innovative ideas, technologies, and initiatives being used by cities today as they strive to create more livable and sustainable cities, and with the potential to stimulate wide-scale change, which would set us on the path towards a one-planet future where humans live in harmony with nature.
The struggle for a sustainable future on this planet will be won or lost in our cities.
A number of actions that cities have to take and actually take together is, first of all, to try to become low carbon, to shift from fossil fuel towards renewable energy.
So we put together an action plan, worked with citizens and businesses and neighborhoods.
We've had over 35,000 residents, 180 organizations who engaged in writing our plan, tens of thousands of residents who've been involved in implementing, because when they write the plan, they own the plan.
The city like Seoul has more than 10 million citizens, so we should provide more environmental transportations. But most important thing is to mobilize the citizens' engagement and participation.
Mais Paris s'est résolument engagé à les relever en développant des solutions innovantes, de moindre impact sur l'environnement. Parmi les pratiques qui sont les nôtres, par exemple, promouvoir les mobilités douces, renforcer la place de la nature dans la ville, déployer l'économie circulaire ou encore développer des énergies durables.
A consumption-based carbon footprint means that when we calculate the emissions in the city from the citizens, we not only look at the emissions that are emitted within the city's borders, we also take into account our consumption of products and services that causes emissions in other countries.
It is an imperative that we see a shift from our reliance on traditional energy sources and look to as many cleaner energy sources as possible.
One of our natural advantages is the number of Sundays. So we must exploit that resource. And that's why we're introducing solar-powered energy.
Leaders in a city have to approach.
My cat just disturbed the play there. Let's see if we can find the...
reliance on traditional energy sources and look to as many cleaner energy sources as possible.
One of our natural advantages is the number of Sundays. So we must exploit that resource. And that's why we're introducing solar-powered energy.
Leaders in a city have to approach individuals to make them partners. It cannot be done top-down. People have to embrace solutions and feel that they are part of a new world.
So when I was thinking of my 8 minutes of putting that together, how I could best tell the story of us as global citizens, as well as what we can do here in Australia, I thought that was probably the best, because it covers, it hits all of the hot buttons, the need for cities to, from the top leadership down to the grassroots, the circular economy, different kinds of economies, the renewable energy aspects distributed, and all the things that have been done very well by some of the great Australian cities here. So briefly, the Science Based Targets initiative is focused on companies and their climate and CO2 emission targets, but over time we're starting to see cities engage more fully in the language around using science to base their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We're seeing nature-based targets being established as well, and then we'll see that trickle down into our built environment. The other is companies and cities and councils are signing up to large-scale renewable energy as a way of achieving their sustainability goals, and it's another one of the projects that I run here at WWF in Australia, and congratulations to the City of Sydney for its all very ambitious, audacious goals in this area also. So I wanted to touch base on a program of work that we're starting to kick off, which is around addressing embodied carbon. So this is a piece of work, the building and construction industry sector, and really it's looking to tackle steel, cement, aluminium as major materials that are used in the built environment, but also, globally, steel, 7% of emissions go into steel manufacturing, and concrete and cement about the same amount. So, while we know that the construction sector is very important to the Australian economy, and we can't do without concrete and steel, there's major advantages to using them. They're also a major source of emissions, and it's one area where I think that we could drive innovation through a collaboration opportunity. But it is complicated, as we know. Any system that you try and tackle, you can't tackle it necessarily from the front end or the back end. You need a systems approach, and you need various intervention points. So, we did some work with PRECINCT, Ben Waters and Hudson Worsley, to help identify what does this system look like, and what are those key intervention points, and what role could we play to help drive a change in the embodied carbon in this area. And you can see the complexity of that spaghetti diagram. So we've kicked off some work. We know that there is low embodied carbon material available in concrete and cement through geopolymers and other materials. We know that timber is available as well, and steel. There's quite a bit of investment going into reducing the embodied carbon of steel. There's also importance of design and upfront thinking about the problem, thinking about the built environment, buildings that one constructs, the roads, the rail. That upfront design is going to be probably one of the most important things, and also making sure that the procurement asks are asked in a way that allows for these products to be able to be utilised, that the risk is spread. So we're putting together a coalition of organisations, design specialists, obviously architects are involved to a great extent, including Caroline Pidcock, Caroline Nola and others who are experts in the tools and the knowledge, supply chain sustainability school. We've got contractors, developers, builders, and also people who are part of the material supply chain. So if you're interested in getting involved, please get in touch with me. You know, we really need to ramp up as much effort as we can in a whole range of areas. And I think, you know, while energy is going very well, we're driving renewables into the system. We'll see 100% renewables. You know, some of the manufacturing and embodied carbon, we're going to need to work together to drive changes in this area as well. So thank you. I'll put my contact details in the chat and happy to take any questions later. Thanks very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Monica. I love the work you're doing, and I love the sort of the way you're bringing so many people from different places or different sectors together and different places. It's really, really important work. Now we'd like to hear from Jess Scully, Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Sydney. Thrilled to have you here, Jess. Jess is a curator, cultural strategist and creative industries advocate who's passionate about connecting people with creativity and empowering them to participate in the life of the city. From 2009 to 2017, Jess was the founding director of Vivid Ideas, Australia's largest creative industries event. She curated creative sector events including Junket, TEDx Sydney and Curating Participation. As a cultural strategist, she was founding contributor to the Sydney Culture Network and a number of other things. In 2016, Jess was elected as a councillor to the City of Sydney, where she was the co-chair of Nightlife and Creative Sector Advisory Panel and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Panel, chair of the Curatorial Advisory Panel, and a member of the Audit and Risk Compliance Committee. Because she didn't have enough on her plate, in 2019, she was elected as Deputy Lord Mayor, which she continues on. She got another re-election this year, where she added Deputy Chairperson of Council's Corporate Finance, Properties and Tender Committee and member of the Central Sydney Planning Committees. She does so many other things, it's impossible to list them all, but she is a powerhouse and we're really looking forward to your contribution today. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Caroline, Tom, Monica, Darren, everyone. I think I know lots of you on this call. It's really lovely to be here. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land as well. So I want to pay my respect to elders past and present of the Eora Nation. And I'm delighted by hearing Caroline explain what a week you've had and how many conversations you've had. They're fantastic, really important, and I hope really fruitful conversations. So in the time that I have, and I'm going to set myself a little timer right now, in the time that I have, I suppose what I want to talk to you about is, you know, how do we get the kind of action we need from my perspective? So as you can tell, you know, I think we have to use the tool of politics, and that's the tool of social decision making to get the results that we need. But the system that we have today has broken down and we are not getting, I think, representative and effective leadership. So how do we get it when it comes to climate action and when it comes to implementing some of these excellent ideas that we know are out there? And knowing that, as Monica said, the solutions have to come in cities because cities are a crucial part of the solution. So in addition to doing some of the things that Caroline mentioned, I also wrote my first book this year, which was released in August. It's called Glimpses of Utopia, Real Ideas for a Fairer World. And in the book, I look at case studies and meet people all over the world who are actually implementing that fairer future we need. But I think the precondition for realising a lot of those solutions is achieving political influence or shaping the way that the political process works so that it is more representative. And I think at the moment we're seeing the end result of a lot of people becoming disillusioned and dissatisfied with the way that politics works. 84% of Australians want action on climate change. That was a statistic from a very large nationwide survey that the ABC did in January this year. And yet our political leaders have so far failed to deliver it. So why is that? We see the impacts of anti-democratic or undemocratic forces, the influence of media moguls and marginal seats of big donors, and you know, the influences that distort the politics that we engage in being effective or being representative. And we also see our political leaders not really resembling the people that they're elected to represent. They're more likely to be older, richer and whiter, and to have a different set of concerns than people that they might be representing, people who might be concerned about a fairer future or about passing on a livable planet. So I think those are some of the conditions that are disabling effective action on climate change. And so what I want to talk to you about today are some of the sideways paths that I think can have a positive influence on the climate action dialogue that we need, particularly in cities. So we conducted a citizens jury process in 2019. Now, this is a process whereby a mini public is selected, a group of 50 Sydney-siders who were, we sent out tens of thousands of letters, and a group of Sydney-siders who responded were then selected through a process of sortition, a representative group who were then paid for their time and entrusted with a whole lot of information and access to experts, and asked to help us shape our policy for 2050. They went through a further 2,500 ideas that were submitted by members of the public, and through that they came up with their own 8 directions for the future of the city. And I want to share just a few of those with you, because it was listening to them deliver their report that they wrote was I think one of the most moving experiences that I've had in my time as a representative, because it showed us that citizens are more ambitious, more far-sighted, more courageous, and more eager to take generous and meaningful action than our politics might suggest. They pushed us to not aim for sustainability, but to aim for a regenerative city. And in the 8 directions, there were 3 that I think are of relevance to this conversation. They called for housing for all, and they asked us to have to include planning incentives for affordable housing in new developments. You know, that inclusive zoning levy, which people in the sector would know about. They think it's something that should be essential. They want to stimulate the supply of collaborative or cooperative living projects and the number of affordable single or family residences. They want penalties for vacancy when they see useful space being left fallow. They want mixed affordable housing for diverse demographics, including emergency accommodation. They called for a regenerative ecosystem, as I said, expansive greening of the city, regenerative agriculture and urban farms, ocean regeneration, 100% renewable energy and microgrid. So it's not just about greening the main grid, but also having a distributed grid, which I think is very important. A circular economy, and of course everything that entails is, and I'm glad to see there are some big moves happening in organising for the circular economy in Sydney at the moment. And building standards, so something that Monica just touched on there, where we have a sustainable construction standards and sustainable materials process. And how do we have policy to incentivise that? How do we have the transport systems to incentivise that? And the last one that I'm going to encourage you to look up the Citizens Jury Report. It is a remarkable document, and but the last one I'll mention is the Moving Efficiently and Sustainably goal, car-free green spaces, connected green corridors, active transport networks, accessible public transport, and electric vehicles for freight and people moving. So these are things that people who work in these sectors are familiar with. But what's extraordinary is when you inform and support people in the general public to have access to this information, they choose these options. And I think we haven't yet given citizens space for constructive debate and meaningful debate that can help put these things on the agenda, and then give politicians' social license and a mandate to take this action. And very briefly, I think there are two great examples. You know, in the UK and in France this year, we saw citizens' assemblies or conventions on climate having putting forward some really far-sighted recommendations on policy, particularly the French one, where they called for retrofitting the cities and investing in retrofitting buildings and the green jobs that would create, as well as removing subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. And in the UK, where 79% of the participants in the Citizens' Assembly called for a green recovery from the COVID crisis. So I think the next big step here, and something that I would love to work with many, you know, with anyone on, is how do we get a citizens' convention on climate of citizens, for citizens, by citizens, in Australia, because I think it's a really important circuit breaker for the toxic politics that we have arrived at, and that is stalling action on many of the things that we've been talking about and that you would have covered in this series. The last thing I'll mention in the time that I have is another thing that we did last year, which was our Alternative Housing Ideas Challenge at the City of Sydney. And that to me, that to me is a really important model that we can carry elements of this forward. The Alternative Ideas Challenge went out and asked people all over the world if you could change something to do with the financing, the planning, the management, the construction, or the design of housing. What would you change in order to get more accessible and fairer outcomes? And the seven responses were, or the seven shortlisted responses, we got 230 responses from all over the world. There were some incredible models there. They were then funded and supported to develop their models up. And there was some real progress that was underway before COVID hit. So I'm really hopeful that we can pick up some of those threads. I don't want to see positive action on dealing with inequality and a lack of access to space in our city being derailed by this crisis. I think that set of solutions will fit this crisis too. It's part of the same, solving the problem. And then I lied. The very last thing I want to tell you about is community wealth building is another big priority for me at the moment, and it's something that I know some people on the call are really interested in as well. And that is really about transparency around how money is spent and where money flows, which is tied into having a circular economy, into having a slavery-free economy as well. But how do we make big institutions and organisations into anchor institutions? And I'm very pleased to say that the City of Sydney has now agreed to be an anchor institution for community wealth building and to help bring some major institutions around us along on the journey so that we can manage our spend and make sure that it's put towards ends that will amplify benefit and are transparent in their impact, and with a particular focus on procuring from First Nations businesses as well. So look, there's so much to talk about, but I'm going to leave my contribution there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jess. Gosh, I'm pleased. I live in the City of Sydney and have people like you in charge. And it's not even in charge, it's actually leading the discussions and the collaborations that we need. That citizens thing was fantastic, and just the whole preparation for Sydney 2050 is excellent. So thank you, and look forward to coming back to you on the postcards. Now I'm really thrilled to introduce Darren Sharp from Monash Sustainable Development Institute. Dr. Darren Sharp is a research fellow at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, where he's research coordinator of Net Zero Precincts, an interdisciplinary research, education and translation program that is leveraging Monash University as a living lab to undertake diverse experiments in net zero energy, mobility and the built environment to accelerate precinct scale decarbonisation. Darren is a sustainability transitions researcher interested in urban experimentation, multi-stakeholder governance. Hang on, I've just lost my thing. Multi-stakeholder governance, grassroots innovations and the sharing economy. His research speaks to the possibilities of social learning, institutional arrangements, community agency, and new urban imaginaries to drive transformation of cities towards sustainability. He co-authored the book Sharing Cities, Activating the Urban Commons, which contains 137 case studies and policies that showcase how communities around the world are using commons-based strategies to meet their needs in housing, food, transportation, and work and energy. I'm really looking forward to your contribution today. Darren, welcome.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's a pleasure to be with you here from the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation on whose land I'm gathered today, and I wish to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And thank you so much to the other speakers as well. It's great to hear from you, Monica and Jess as well. So today I'm going to really be talking about how urban experimentation can accelerate sustainable urban futures through examples from the Net Zero Precincts program that you just mentioned, Caroline, and also some Sharing Cities work that I'm involved in as well. So you might be sort of scratching your head wondering what I mean by urban experimentation. This is really an emerging area from sustainability transitions, research and practice. So we're seeing a whole bunch of different stakeholders coming together, academics, government, civil society, private sector actors to trial alternative city futures, multi-stakeholder governance, grassroots innovations, new modes of sustainable urban development. A lot of the sort of examples that the previous two speakers have pointed to already. And it makes sense to sort of have a focus on cities, given that, you know, over half the world's population live in urban areas. Cities have become a logical transition arena to undertake co-creative collaboration, to envision alternative economies, and to trial new experiments through place-based social learning environments like urban living labs and other open innovation processes. So today I want to take you through a couple of examples of urban experimentation in practice and then discuss how these participatory approaches can accelerate the transformation of cities towards sustainability. So to start with, I'll point you towards the Net Zero initiative. So to give a bit of context, I'm the research coordinator of the Net Zero Precincts program at Monash, which is being led by Professor Rob Raven at our institute, the Sustainable Development Institute. And Net Zero Precincts is part of the Net Zero initiative. So this is a $135 million program that's really transforming the universities for Australian campuses to become net zero by 2030, in line with the Paris Agreement targets. And the Net Zero program includes a range of measures, including energy efficiency upgrades such as LEDs, high-performing building facades, more efficient appliances, campus electrification, a whole bunch of activities. Thousands of solar panels have been installed, a renewable energy power purchase agreement has been signed to buy rights to electricity, and a large-scale renewable electricity, microgrid is also on site, which includes 1 megawatt of battery storage, which is, I guess, a real-world demonstration of a transactive energy market solution in action. So there's a whole bunch of green infrastructure transformation happening at the level of Monash University, particularly at the Clayton campus, our main campus in the southeast of Melbourne. And what we're doing with the Net Zero Precincts program is essentially trying to develop a research, education and translation program. And we were just lucky enough a couple of weeks ago to find out that we won an ARC linkage grant to actually undertake this work over the next 4 years. So the Net Zero Precincts program is really going to be leveraging the Monash Technology Precinct and the Monash Clayton campus as a living lab to really undertake and roll out a range of net zero experiments in the areas of energy, in mobility, in the built environment, to really research, develop and implement the Net Zero initiative through a range of these socio-technical innovations. What we're doing is we're coming together with a real interdisciplinary team from MSDI, from our colleagues at the Faculty of IT, people working in data science, people working in the Faculty of Arts, people from the Data Futures Institute, from the Energy Institute. So it's a really inter and cross-disciplinary research program. And we have a bunch of really wonderful industry and government partners as well who share our ambition and vision and goals, including Engie, which is a big French energy multinational who are sort of global leaders in energy as a service and transition at a precinct scale, which is what we're particularly focusing on. We've got also closer to home the city of Monash as a key partner. They have a goal to become a carbon neutral city by 2025. We have the CSIRO, who has a big office just adjacent to us, also part of the precinct in Clayton. They have a network of living labs that they're running, setting up and running around Australia as well. So we want to basically share and learn from each other and develop a really transferable step-by-step transition framework that will support the design and rollout of net zero precincts by industry and government partners, both in Australia and globally. So that's a bit of a taste for the net zero precincts work that we're kicking off at the moment. But I also want to sort of switch gears and give you another example, perhaps at a bit more of a grassroots level, looking at the Sharing Cities movement, which is really a new imaginary of urban transformation, which prefigures alternative social practices, collaborative governance and modes of exchange that really challenge neoliberal pathways of economic growth, of deregulation and privatisation. So sharing cities have emerged as new imaginaries that reframe urban experimentation and create new social reality through grassroots innovations, infrastructure for sharing, for making and for repair, through cooperative enterprise development, through community wealth building. Some of the examples that Jess gave are a great example of that. And you can sort of see here the sort of things we're talking about in terms of urban agriculture, tool libraries, participatory budgeting, repair cafes, activating empty shop fronts and vacant land and so on. So what we're seeing actually now come to bear is that a variety of sharing cities have actually come into being, being led by places like Seoul and Amsterdam, who have made their assets and infrastructure, including public buildings and open data, more amenable to sharing. Other local governments, including the city of Bologna in Italy, have reimagined their city as a commons. And they've introduced really groundbreaking institutional arrangements through something called the Bologna Regulation, which actually empowers active citizens to approach local council and come up with an urban commons project. Any one of these is a good example here in the slide here. And then to go to council, propose a collaborative project, and then the council will actually come back if they approve the project, work together to collaborate on coming up with a collaborative agreement, a collaboration pact, and actually a power sharing arrangement where the citizens and the city co-govern together and bringing a range of industry and government and other civil society partners to provide staff, to provide resources and a variety of different assets to basically undertake these co-governance experiments together in a really co-creative, collaborative way. A good example of how sharing cities are kind of coming to life at a grassroots level, we can also point to this interesting case study in Sweden, which I was fortunate enough to visit. It seems like a lifetime ago now, but last October I went to the Sharing Cities Summit, which was held in Lund University in Malmö, and I went and got a tour of this amazing development which is underway in Malmö in the south of Sweden, as you can see on the map there. It's sort of just near Copenhagen, very south of Sweden. And, Malmö are a really innovative local council who've really forged a path around sustainable green urban development. And what they're trialling at this site here in 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝗂𝗿, which was a former hospital, they're actually, City of Malmö are coming together with 13 real estate developers, an energy company, and they're building 1,000 new dwellings, which is actually served by shared infrastructure, including a mobility hub for electric cars and e-bikes and cargo bikes, a stuff bank for sharing books, sharing toys, a tool library, a repair hub where residents can come together to fix things, clothing, apparel, appliances, whatever it might be, and also a bike kitchen, upcycling activities, co-working, and so on. So this is a really great example of how multi-stakeholders from the public, private, civil society sectors can come together and actually create shared urban environments and share assets and resources together from this great example here in Sweden. So just to kind of wrap things up before I finish, just want to reiterate how urban experimentation can accelerate sustainable futures. So I would suggest it's about being intentionally transformative through place-based learning, through stakeholder empowerment, by challenging institutional arrangements. Jess gave a good example with citizen juries and citizens' assemblies. I think the Bologna example is another great way of looking at that as well. By developing narratives of change, by being bold, having a big vision and putting those visions and narratives forward, undertaking that in a collaborative sense, through community wealth building as well. It's about being diverse. There's no silver bullet here. So I think we need to look at this as a portfolio of experiments. There's no one right way of doing this. It's about trial and error. So I think multiplicity is a key message here as well, about having diverse, multiple experiments. And it's about being collaborative. So how can we look at this through a polycentric lens? How do we involve and engage actors at different levels to bring bottom up and top down together in the middle somehow? Multi-stakeholder governance, the role of an enabling or partner state, intermediaries, city networks. So I think together we can look at these as a great sort of, recipe book for how we can undertake these kind of transformative actions together. And I look forward to opening up a conversation with all of you here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren. That's so exciting and such a good lead on from both Monica and Jess. So I'm just wondering if there are any questions in the audience. I think David Ness is asking if the net zero precinct work seems focused on renewables. I'm wondering if it could be elevated to encompass embodied carbon that will equal operational carbon by 2050. Are you aligning, is it just on operational energies, or are you looking at other sort of carbon as well, Darren?
The project's really just getting going. So the Net Zero Initiative has been around for about 2 or 3 years now. And we literally just found out 2 weeks ago that we won the ARC linkage grant for the Net Zero Precincts work. So really the first part of that is about code mapping the precinct, and we're undertaking a really comprehensive systems analysis set of work next year to really understand both the boundaries of the precinct, but also current emissions, energy use, transport patterns, quantity and size of the buildings, institutional features, precinct policies. It's complicated. So I don't have a simple answer, unfortunately, David. And I am coming at this more from a social science point of view as someone with an expertise in collaborative governance, arrangements and living labs, bringing multi-stakeholders together to undertake these kind of practices together.
And do you think there's any value in looking at individual carbon budgets or like personal carbon budgets as part of this, or is that just a too divisive an approach? It's interesting. I mean, thinking about David's comment earlier in the chat about consumption, I think part of the tricky part of working at a precinct scale is, how people get to the precinct, which is a challenge for our Clayton campus because we're in the southeastern suburbs and we haven't been very well served by public transport. So we're very dependent on car travel to get into the campus. It's a typical kind of commuter campus away from the central business district of Melbourne, but it is the second highest employer outside of the Melbourne CBD. And we're fortunate enough to have a rail link just announced by the Vic government to actually connect a new train station over the next few years. So it's difficult to, look at this in terms of, how people getting to the precinct, what are their consumption patterns in and around the precinct. A lot of, open questions yet to be answered. And I know, Jess, the City of Sydney's done an awful lot of work on trying to get cars out of the city or trying to enable people to get to the city in much more low energy intensive ways. Do you count those carbon emissions of travel in the plans that you're making, or is that sort of a separate budget in that? Yeah, how does the city deal with the carbon budgets of transport?
I'm not sure, actually, that's a really good question. I'm not sure if we count the emissions of transport that's just going in and out of the city as part of our budget. I think our carbon accounting is more around our operations. So we would account for our own transport use. But now we've reached a stage where the only way we can, our next phase is to enable the community to and business to reduce their emissions. So we mostly do that through working in partnership. So similar sort of thing to what Monica described. So our kind of key vehicles are things like the Better Buildings Partnership and the Sustainable Destinations Partnership, where we work with those entities. Better Buildings Partnership, for example, made up of the companies that own about 50% or more of the commercial office space in the city, and we've worked with them over the past 10 years to reduce their energy consumption, water use and their waste. And we've now, since 2018, been doing the same with entertainment and hospitality and accommodation sector businesses, because they are quite carbon intensive. They're 21% of the energy use in our local economy is from the accommodation and entertainment sector. So now we're working with them to reduce that, but I'm not sure where transport fits into that accounting for all of those sectors, but it's a great question.
Great. And Monica, do you have any reflections on any of this?
Well, I wanted to make a comment about the Better Buildings Partnership and also personal carbon budgets. I think the Better Buildings Partnership has started to look at gamification, so competitions between buildings, so it becomes a bit of fun for the tenants. Then the property owners also need to get encouraged to provide incentives to the tenants to drive their emissions down. They get little awards and rewards, and then they're competing with other buildings. And I think that gamification piece and making it fun, normalizing, setting the norms around how you reduce your carbon emissions is a really important part of engaging customers in there, because there's no doubt that as we move through this journey, we're all improving our own lifestyle and sustainability, reducing our footprint and doing our carbon offsetting, and that it will soon become standard practice across different communities and sectors. So I do see it, even if you're doing it at the precinct level, that there'll be some incentive for gamifying it and making it.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we might, oh, sorry, did you know?
Can I just add one thing really briefly? Like, even though something like the Better Buildings Partnership and Sustainable Destinations Partnership has been really effective in reducing emissions, I guess the reason I raise the politics part of it is that it hasn't been without opposition. So even though, for example, Sustainable Destination Partnership, 21% of our emissions, we cop criticism from people for providing funding or support incentives to 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗂𝗿 or, merit, one of those big hotel chains, they're not coming to mind, but, we cop flack for that. And we're just lucky that we have a majority and that we're able to make that happen. But that's why I think public education and public participation and political influence has to be there, so you can actually enact and stick with this kind of policy change, because otherwise it's a pitched battle every time you try and do it.
Too right. I think that deliberative democracy model is a really powerful, very important, bring unusual group of people from citizens, jury together, educate them, support them, and let them come up with their own conclusion. And very often they'll be, like any jury, based on the evidence, they'll make a decision.
Okay, so we've got a comment or a question from Adam Jeffrey about the fragmented body of knowledge on embodied carbon, and how do we standardise or educate on that? I mean, just from this Architects Declare thing, I think it's a very nascent area that for architects to be considering. They've not yet, they've kind of known about it, but not really calculated it. And we're putting together a whole bit of work trying to draw up, well, what is it? What are the definitions? What are the boundaries? What's included? How do you calculate it, etc. And I think more and more work will be coming out of that. Darren, is that something you're looking at in your work at Monash?
No, not particularly. Carolyn, sorry, I can't really speak to that specifically, but perhaps Jess or Monica might have something further to add.
No, it's really, it's surprisingly, sort of something we've ignored really in Australia. And I think it's just emerging. And I think that, but everyone's, the group of people I'm working with, Architects Declare and Engineers Declare, is really aware of that and trying to sort of get some parameters in place. And I imagine it's something that might evolve a bit as we test it out and see how that works as we calculate. So on that note,
I can add to that.
Sorry, Monica.
So the work that I've been doing through the Embodied Carbon project, and look, I'm not an expert in this area. You know, like Darren, I'm more of a social ecologist and economist, but what I have observed is the environmental product declarations, for example, you can't compare apples and apples, you know, one cement product with another concrete product. It's just not, we're not able to do that. And the GBCA tools are different to the Fulkburn calculator tools. So there's a lot of complexity in this area. And I'm hoping, you know, Caroline, with the work that you're doing, is going to be a step in the direction that we actually can compare some of those tools to make it easier to assess that embodied carbon.
Right.
Piece. So that any projects that are being developed, there's a one-stop shop.
You can compare apples with apples. Yeah. So on that note, we might highlight Tom, my co-convener today, 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝗁. And I think Lisa was going to start to share some of the postcards that we've been sent in, and the first one is from Monica. So Monica, would you like to? And so we might have a little bit of a discussion around each of these and what they mean for our future.
So one of my friends, Claire Marshall, she had an idea to put this Museum of the Futures together. Which I absolutely love. You know, I think the arts are such an important part of helping us through, you know, the emotional, spiritual, intellectual elements of taking us on the journey to, you know, what is the future going to look like for us? And grant money from the City of Sydney, working with 6 or 7 artists to, I mean, they put 3D object together. And then they've actually created this online Museum of the Futures, and it is stories of the positive futures that we envisage. And I think it plays such an important role in helping us, you know, the arts play such an important role in helping us to imagine what those futures are going to look like. So that's why I wanted to have that postcard featured.
Sounds exciting. Jess, I imagine you'd be right behind that.
Yes, I went to the virtual launch of this and it was fabulous. And wonderful collaborations, because I think, you know, as Monica said, you know, the artists are imagining the future, but kind of making these provocations that otherwise you might not encounter, and in a more sensory and embodied way, I think, than we sometimes think about when we talk about the future. They're feeling it, you know. It was beautiful.
Right, because I think you know, was it Winston Churchill who said, if not, you know, if we can't afford art after the Second World, during the war, what are we fighting for? Because it's kind of the soul and essence of all of us. Okay, so maybe the next one, Lisa. This is from Deputy Lord Mayor Jess Scully.
Again, we're on the same topic here, Monica. So basically, this is the idea that in this future that I'm writing a postcard from, it's a place where we create, we regenerate buildings and places that are neglected, and we regenerate them, and communities that are experiencing traumas or transitions, and we regenerate them using culture. And so the example that I'm sharing is from American artist 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝗁𝗍𝗂𝗍 and the work that he's done on the south side of Chicago and beyond, where he uses real estate as his medium, and he buys up neglected or buildings that are condemned that were significant places in the neighborhood, a place that has suffered for a number of reasons. It's, you know, racially charged zoning and funding and a whole bunch of other reasons. And he's bought them, and he's bought collections, whether they're books, art, record collections, and he's restored these buildings, put the collections to public use in them, and created educational and work systems in the process of regenerating these buildings. And his work is extraordinary. So that's my vision of the future, really, is where you have generous civic spaces and creative spaces that are returned to communities, and people are involved in the process of stewarding them and creating them.
I don't think you can ever have too many books. My husband might disagree, but I don't think you can. So Tom and Darren, step in.
Oh yeah, I love this idea, Jess, of being able to mold neighborhoods. I think with our cities, with our suburbs, with our built environment, there's such a, on the surface, a degree of permanence. But in reality, I think, there's actually a huge amount of plasticity there. And when we can find those kind of spaces that we're, sometimes they're talked about as like seed forms, like a lot of the sharing cities examples, whether it's urban agriculture or repair cafes or tool libraries. It's often just like trying to find those, opportunities or ruptures in the kind of urban fabric where people can come together almost like in a, sometimes like a temporary autonomous zone where you can experiment and you can actually demonstrate potential futures to your neighbours and to other citizens, because so much of this is often about making the invisible visible, because it's just hard to sometimes imagine these alternatives. And when you're seeing it in your lived kind of experience, when you're going down the street and there's, oh, look, there's a repair cafe. What on earth is that? Or, and I think there's a project, Participatory City in London, which is doing a great job of doing that, where they actually have like a shop front and they've got support from 2 councils to have like an onboarding process where they bring citizens in, residents in, to kind of see how they can, undertake co-production and co-governance activities, commenting, together, which is really exciting to create social value in new ways.
Beautiful.
And I think it's also very important in the message that it sends about the empowerment of the community in having agency to do these things at a scale, right? It's often entrusted to the industry, whatever that is, right? Or the profession, right? That's us. I shouldn't be arguing against architects having a role in things, but it's often a barrier for communities to think that they actually have agency to shape their neighborhoods at this scale. It's telling in some way that it's come out of almost fractured communities in the States, but some of the most interesting community work in city making has come from places like Chicago, like Detroit, like Baltimore, where industry has stepped away because there's no profit margin, there's no money to be made. And all of a sudden there's a liberating presence for these communities to actually have agency. In Sydney, we suffer from our success, it's wealthy and it's booming, so industry is feeding at the trough, it never goes away. But examples like this, I think, are really empowering because they suggest that there is a possibility. You don't need, lend-lease to step in to make a city, right? The city can, in fact, make itself.
Beautiful. Okay, after that, we'll go on to our next one. From My Veranda. Now, I don't think Sam's on the call today. Are you, Sam? No. So perhaps, Tom, do you want to lead this one? No, okay. I think this is, Sam Bostead is part of the Australian Architects Declare group, and he lives in Brisbane. And do you want to take it, Tom, or do you want me to go? No?
Go ahead. I've just had a 20-second read of it, right? So
okay. Go.
Having talked to Sam and the work that he does in Brisbane with his practice dealing with flooding, and not flooding as an apocalyptic crisis, but flooding as an endemic thing that happens in a place like Brisbane, which has been built, believe it or not, in a floodplain. So it's going to flood. It's going to flood in progressively more extreme versions. So this idea of understanding the floodscape as a part of your city, and it precludes certain activities, might preclude building permanent structures, but it also then starts to open up the possibility for temporary activities, for zones of movement along the river. So understanding, typically we've tried to be resilient about flooding. Let's build walls, let's contain the flooding. That's going to become progressively more and more difficult, more and more expensive, and more unrealistic. So the you know, I always go back to the original vision of LA. The Tongva who lived in the LA Valley moved with the river. The LA River was a flood event, and they shifted and moved their villages with it. They grew crops 4 times a year because the valley was that fertile. They just didn't build permanent structures because the river, the flood events were unpredictable. So in some sense, we understand the plain as a space of continuous change and continuous movement, rather than something that we try and solidify, rather than something that we try and resist. And cycling happens to be one of those really beautiful human activities that, you know, if you've been to Copenhagen or Amsterdam, it's a veritable flood of human movement. So there's a nice synergy between the idea of the floodscape or the flood plain being inhabited by a kind of human flood as well.
I think that what I particularly like about this is it's suggesting that we should actually, rather than trying to control and manage our environment, we need to work with it and understand what happens with it. Because a flood is not, I mean, it's only in our understanding that it's a disaster because we've built badly or built in the wrong places, whereas it's a sort of an opportunity to bring nutrients and water and a whole lot of things to places to make them better. If we haven't built houses there, so or other buildings. So I think that's really important in how we work forward. Monica, you're from Brisbane. What do you think?
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed from the part of Brisbane that I'm near the Bayside is there's been a lot of investment in cycleways, but not separated cycleways. So I've also moved from 20 years living in the city of Sydney to Bayside Council, you know, Walleye Creek, and all of a sudden when I go around the city, there's all these cycleways that have popped up around the place because of the COVID, I guess. The councils have just gone, we need to make our roads safer for cyclists because people are using more active transport modes when they're living at home, which I think is wonderful to see. I think it's like a radical reclaim the streets moment, isn't it? I've really enjoyed watching that happen.
And finally, the state government's on board, which is exciting. Okay. Maybe we'll go on to the next one, Lisa. Okay, David Ness. I think David is online. So David, would you like to speak to this quickly? Can he be unsilenced, unmuted, or?
I'll just unmute myself.
There we go.
Yes.
Yep.
This just fits with what I was trying to say in our session 2 on the 25th about you know, meeting our requirements with less resources. And yeah, I once stayed in a Zen Buddhist temple in Kyoto, and it was all very simple and beautiful. You know, as I said, you know, the one space served several purposes. You know, it's a bit like the sharing that Darren mentioned. You know, I slept there, the futon got rolled up in the morning, and then a monk came and opened the cupboard. And so just this simple kind of approach, which I think actually probably fits well with a lot of Indigenous approaches here, where it's, you know, they're very circular and they don't use a lot of resources. And anyway, the Japanese have got a philosophy, motai nai. It means everything is too precious to waste. So, and also another policy, wabi-sabi, respect for the old and worn. I'm a bit old and worn, so, but no, really, seriously though, shared use and preference for quality over volume, and respect for natural and man-made, woman-made objects has lessons for us all. Less is more. So, yeah, I was, yeah, that's what I was saying on Wednesday.
And I think it's so, the other thing about it is it's so classic and so beautiful that it's almost, it's timeless in its like you would never know when that was built, and that's kind of a really important thing. So do you think that, oh, sorry.
I was going to say it's all modular too. You know, so it can be taken apart. And I've actually used a case of an ancient Japanese sage. He moved from Kyoto, where it was all very consuming, and he had a little hut, a 10-foot by 10-foot hut on the mountain, and he took it on a cart, and it was all demountable. So, you know, there are lessons there for building when we can take buildings apart, like Lego sets. Yeah, but just more with less and less.
I think, and I think another interesting thing here is that multi-purpose use of space. And I'm just wondering, Jess, Scully, whether, you know, when sort of in a couple of months, if there's less people coming into the city to use for office space, if there's, you know, a different thing happening, whether the city might need to be really rethinking how it uses its spaces in much more diverse and creative ways. Is that something that's on the cards?
I think it is. I think one of the grants that we have open at the moment until December 7, FYI, a series of grants encouraging people to reuse corporate lobbies and take them turn them into performance spaces, and trying to seed more creative production and performance in space that's being left underutilised due to the reduction in use of the CBD during the pandemic. And that's part of our plan for creative-led recovery. But reusing that space that has been commercial space in a creative way is a short-term fix. But I think in the longer term, we do need to think about how we make our buildings work harder and do serve multiple purposes. But I think David's idea, the disassembly rather than demolition of buildings is going to be one of the key things that we need to look at in the future. And when we think about the buildings we build and design and approve, how can they be taken apart and how can they be made of materials that can be reused? It's so important.
And Darren, I imagine the same's in the universities where there's a lot more online learning, and how can those spaces, what's going to happen with all that teaching space, another thing in the future?
Yeah, we're a bit restricted at universities. We have to sort of stay, you know, to our kind of core business of, you know, research and teaching. But I was going to give maybe some other examples from the sharing cities kind of space where the city of Seoul are really pioneers here, where they've opened up over 800 public buildings for use by the community during idle hours. So when, you know, staff aren't at those buildings, you can actually book meeting spaces and so on to really try and, you know, utilise those idle assets more effectively. And Amsterdam has kind of, you know, gone in a similar direction, albeit a bit more of a modest approach, where they've trialled a similar thing, opening up a whole bunch of meeting rooms in public, you know, council offices and so on, with a particular focus on social enterprise and organisations with a social impact mission, and to make those buildings available to those groups and so on, which I think is fascinating. And there's similar kinds of experiments in space sharing going on all over the place.
Fabulous. Okay, next postcard, please. Visible. By David Robertson. I don't think David's on the line, is he? Yes, he is. David, would you like to talk to this?
Hello, everyone. Not particularly. I intended it more as, I guess, a provocation to the people who would be speaking, but I suppose for me, many of the things that we view as unsustainable or undesirable, we hide. And we avoid seeing or acknowledging, or we assume it's being controlled by or managed by someone else. Obvious things to that would be things like burying power lines or running drains underneath streets and so on, so that we can't see them. But what would it be like in the future if, in constructing our urban reality, we were able to sense a greater number of the impacts or things that we're having or drawing on or contributing back. So that's the intent, but it's open for interpretation and discussion.
I'll just offer something on this because I took your lead, David, and I've interpreted something about this. On the basis of your first thing, what used to be streets, now overflowing urban gardens, et cetera, et cetera. I'm super interested in the street as a resource, as a spatial, civic community resource. And what we don't realize is that our cities have been designed not for humans, but for the movement of goods and material and energy. And there's a super interesting, I'll post it in the chat, series of studies by 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝘁𝗂𝗿 at Yale University on a thing called carbon form. And she's an urbanist and an architect. And her point is that our cities are really the byproducts of this movement of energy and materials. So if you think about it, you know, Oxford Street that runs through Darlinghurst is a product of the movement of vehicles driven by the carbon form of a car, a 1-ton vehicle designed to get you really inefficiently up the street to buy a liter of milk. And we're so embedded with this, and our skyscrapers are products of carbon form, cheap electricity that powers air conditioning, lifts, lights, computers, all of those things. The sprawl of Sydney is driven by carbon form. You know, so our streets are really driven by this idea of moving vehicles, not satisfying the needs of people. So to understand that, you immediately understand that the Tesla is simply a propagation of carbon form. It's another car occupying space that a human being could occupy. And it's taking 1.5 tons of metal to move a person through that space. And it's occupying public space with a piece of private property. So that's the challenge that we have. I would say that, David, this is an immensely radical, you know, proposition for taking over the streets. But we have to do it, right? In the same way that 𝗕𝗲𝘁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁, you know, empowers the community to take over what's already theirs, physically, spatially, materially, socially. We need to do this as well with the most important resource we have, which is a spatial resource. And we've done a lot of work in the transformation of streets, believe it or not, sometimes in partnership with, you know, Roads and Maritime Authority and Transport, who are in the carbon form business, right? You know, 8 lanes of WestConnex feeder roads, that's carbon form. But if you know that, you know how to tweak these things. And it is a transformational idea in which you take the street, which is already public space. It is owned by the public. And you cease to allow it to be co-opted by a single instance of private property. So we're doing a little bit of work with the Glebe Chamber of Commerce. Is it also super radical because they want to take over some parking spaces, right? And they can do it by stealth, and all of a sudden these things happen, and it helps the business because there's more footpath space. And it is, so it's a transgressive act, right? But I would urge everyone to engage in this transgressive act of taking back what's already ours. Because it's not a city, these streets are not designed for humans. So we do have to engage in this act of, in a sense, kind of re-inhabiting spaces that weren't designed for us. There's where the creativity comes from, right? But you know what? Again, it simply requires the agency and the energy of the community. The needs are already there. And as soon as you get rid of the word street and say public space, you know, instead of me living on Victoria Street in Botswana, I could live on Victoria Place. Right? And imagine if it didn't have cars in it. Cars can go down it, but they're the 3rd or 4th priority in us understanding what this street is. It would be magical and amazing, right? So, and what that allows us to do, and I think this speaks to some of the things that Jess was talking about in terms of a reformation of housing. If you can live a lot of your life in public, in shared facilities, a great shared kitchen, a great shared tool shed, the things that Darren mentioned about this civic luxury, all of a sudden you need a smaller house, right? Less of your capital, less of your investment needs to be in private property. More of your life can be lived in public, this thing George Monbiot, The Guardian, calls very evocatively public luxury. You know, that's where our money should go. The very nice thing about that is that the real estate we need to make that happen is already there, and it's already owned by us. We just need to continue to transgress and, in a sense, trespass into space that's already ours. So I like this idea a lot, whether you intended it or not, David, to be really transgressive. It is. I think the most radical thing that we can do is to share things. That subverts so many of the carbon form kind of capitalist structures of our society if we simply share things.
Fantastic. I think it's fantastic when you kind of give them permission to be radical and change the uses of things. Okay, Lisa, the next one.
Very quickly, because I think this is really powerful. Just to say one thing, which is that 40% of public space in our city is the street, the road. So that is the most significant piece of public space. And as Tom has said, it's handed over to one use that's prioritised to the detriment of all others. So the more that we can rehabilitate our thinking that puts humans second, not even second, maybe third or fourth on the list of priorities for the street, the better we'll get, the better cities will get, the better use we'll get of public space as well.
Perfect.
Can I just quickly jump in as well,
Yep.
just to sort of extend the conversation a bit further around David's fantastic and provocative postcard. This just reminded me of positive and negative externalities, and you know, the kind of thinking around true cost economics, which I think we should, you know, focus on more as well. And a lot of my work in the kind of platform economy space, you know, so we give up so much in terms of the convenience that we have on our devices, and just kind of like tap away and order a meal and, you know, order a ride and so on. And what those, you know, vastly complex systems is hiding, which we've been made so aware of in the last, you know, few days and weeks, is the precarity of the workers, the people, the living humans who are putting their lives on the line, unfortunately, are dying because of, you know, the need for them to support their families and earn a living and have a livelihood, and the vulnerability of those people and the exploitation of those workers and so on. And so I think that, you know, the negative externalities of our various systems are so important to kind of consider, but also the positive externalities that are generated by, you know, some of the more hopeful cases and examples that we've been hearing about today. So, you know, feedback loops all around, I think, is a good idea.
Fantastic.
I have a contribution to make to this.
Great.
It provoked in me. You know, we watch Alan Kohler on the ABC at the end of the, you know, 7 o'clock news talk about the stock exchange and how the stocks are going. And I'd really like to see somewhere on our streets, visible to all of us, you know, how are we going? You know, what's the CO2 budget, for example, you know, the water budget, you know, the facts that there are, okay, 40% of our street is currently, you know, 40% of our public space is streets. Well, you know, we've got a target to go there. How do we do that? And some statistics that help us to remind us that that's part of us as well, not just your stock market concerns, but having something where we can see that publicly and visibly would be fantastic also.
Great. Okay, next postcard, Lisa. Ah, this is mine. This is my idea is that I just think we need to be adjusting our thinking and ways of being and doing to realize that we are part of nature. We are, and nature is sort of the land and the sea and the skies, and that if we start to think in that way, because our mindsets are the most important things for changing anything that we do. It's Donella Meadows talks about the important leverage point in complex systems being the mindset. And once we can change that, we can change anything. And I just think that we've also got to make sure we remember that balance of yin and yang, that, you know, that with dark there is light, with energy there's calm, and a whole lot of different things in the way we think and are in the world. So, and I think that our Indigenous custodians of this land have so much to teach us in this regard, and just their whole way of thinking and being and relationship to time and relationship to country is something that we all desperately need to learn from. So I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
I'm happy to comment. I love that, Caroline. Thank you so much for sharing that. It just, I mean, I think this is really deep. It gets me thinking about Joseph Campbell's work and this idea of myths to live by. I think this is kind of like the ground of our being kind of conversation. It's Friday afternoon. Maybe I'm getting a bit kind of, introspective here, but, I think there's a lot to be said for the kind of Judeo-Christian kind of mythology around, human being on top of the kind of hierarchy and having dominion over all the beasts and all the animals and over nature and everything. I think that, has led us down a pretty, difficult kind of path. And I think we're living the consequences of that to a large degree now, the underlying myths that kind of lead our civilizations. And so I just think, again, going back to the idea of diversity and pluralism, there's so many other myths that we could be picking up and using to change our mindset to demonstrate alternative ways of being in the world, which I think are worth, considering and exploring together.
I was listening to Brené Brown interview Elizabeth Lesser the other day on her new book, Cassandra, which is about women telling stories. And even if you just shift, even within the Western world from the male, I mean, our stories have predominantly been told by males with a male perspective. And just by shifting to a women's perspective, there's a whole different world, because women are not that big on fight and flight. They're actually more into tend and mend, which is quite a different sort of understanding of the whole world that we've been led to not believe. So I think we do embed our lives in stories that perhaps might not be correct, or there's many other stories that we need to understand. Okay,
well,
next one.
Don't you think that the whole COVID experience is helping to precipitate us to recognise that we are deeply connected to the natural world?
Yeah.
And, hopefully that tips into mindset and a paradigm shift that gets us to be thinking about that in a deeper way. I mean, certainly for my 15-year-old, and I think generally, children of this generation who've gone through this in their formative years, I mean, they don't know you can have a mindset any other way than go, wow, it's a very impactful, all we're seeing, all we're experiencing about bushfires, COVID, it's confronting us with very much this fact at the moment, and how we need to create that balance again.
Yeah. Okay, next card is David Ness again. David, are you able to chat to this? Hello, is he here still? Yep. David, are you coming on? We can't hear you if you're muted, I think. There we go.
Unmute. You should hear me now.
Yeah.
This follows on from a previous example from Japan, that simple room, because my passion is anti, massive office buildings and towers, which popping up in our cities every day. I mean, a couple of days ago, there was a proposal for a 34-storey tower in Adelaide. And this is at a time, when we're in recession and, we've got COVID to deal with. But so I'm arguing for, building smaller, smarter and less. And COVID has shown that we can do that. Because, working from home, there's less demand for real estate, and, there's less traffic on the roads. But I just want to come to the notion of a carbon price, because I think that's critical to get to net zero carbon, particularly in the built environment, because it will act as a disincentive to extravagant new buildings, and it will favour adaptation of existings. And a bit like those sort of projects that Jess mentioned, the regeneration of older, you know, from the book, the regeneration of older properties, you know, vacant buildings. I mean, our cities are full of vacant buildings. I mean, Adelaide's got a huge amount of vacant office space, and meanwhile, you know, almost every day there's a proposal for a new tower. So, yeah, I think, but really at the start of projects, we can save most carbon by looking at other options, such as not building at all. And this has been documented. Yep. Okay.
Thanks, David. Would anyone else like to comment on this? This maybe Monica with your carbon.
I guess no one really at this stage is advocating going back to the days of the carbon price, but what we are starting to see are carbon border taxes. So the European Union, they have their taxonomy, which makes it very clear. If you want to sell your goods and services to the European Union, you're going to be faced with a border tax adjustment that will look at the carbon load of the product that you're selling. And I suspect we'll start to see more and more of that in our part of the world, in Japan, Korea, and the US. So the new carbon price, I reckon, is the carbon border tax adjustment that will occur and will affect us.
And also, is it the TCFD, the
Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure?
Yeah, where companies are being forced to report on their carbon, and buildings are going to form part of that. And, you know, we're either going to be, well, architects will have to be able to account for it, and people will be buying low carbon buildings. So I think there's going to be a whole lot of drivers on that one. Now we're coming up we're sort of 3 minutes away from finishing. So I'm just wondering if everyone would like to just maybe spend about 30 seconds sort of summing up their ideas about living better. This is in 30 seconds. I know that's a bit tricky, but just sort of some takeaway for what we should be thinking about as we look to the future, and in a very positive and excited way. Would you like to start, Darren? Or
yeah, I mean, I would just, you know, reiterate that we need to do this together in concert with our, you know, fellow citizens, and you know, we need to be bold. We need to really try and, you know, have big picture visions and develop transformative narratives of change, and to, you know, try and use new means, whether it's citizen juries or the collaborative governance experiments that we're seeing in Bologna and elsewhere, participatory budgeting, and, you know, just living labs are another great example of, you know, how you bring these different actors together, and to, you know, yeah, just keep going. It just takes you know, one step after the other, and just to try and replicate and connect what we're doing with others around the world, because there's kind of seeds of innovation happening everywhere, and it's actually a massive movement if you look at the big picture. So yeah, I just remain hopeful about the future.
Okay, Jess, Scully.
Oh my God, I've never spoken for 30 seconds in my life, Caroline. This is a major struggle. There you go, tough gone. What Darren said, basically, we've got to bring people on this journey and empower them to be the ones who are actively choosing this, and actively choosing something that's better to live in today, not just better in some accounting system that they don't understand, that it's hard to explain in the future, right? What do you get when you get those 50-40% of road space back for people? What do you get when you live in these places that account for your temperature and your comfort, as well as the kind of carbon relieving qualities of the canopy, or whatever, you know, whatever it is? So how do we bring people along on that journey? How do we sell the positive experience of getting there? And how do we make change our systems so that people are the empowered decision makers that get us to this place, and we cut across the politics that's stopping us getting there?
Fantastic, Jess. Well done. Monica.
One of the areas that gives me most heart is the enormous enthusiasm that people have in the sustainability field. So, you know, there's a level of social capital there that we can tap into to support communities moving alive. You know, we all generally want the same thing. We also want to be able to put food on the table, give our children a fair education, and create, you know, systems that work for people. So working together, collaborating. People want a cold beer and warm showers. You know, that's the way forward, I reckon, in a sustainable future. And that's a good Friday afternoon thing to end on, I reckon. Time for a beer. What do you reckon?
I think so. Tom, would you like to add your closing summation?
I can't add anything more attractive or appealing than that, except to reiterate the idea that we need to tell better stories about the future. That's the thing that will bring everyone along with us. For a long time, we've complained about the present and feared the future. And that's not a way to motivate people. That's not a good story to tell. You know, I'm in a nice position. This is what we do in the built environment. We tell stories about what the future is going to be like. And I think, but it's not just up to us, right? It's up to, this is why I think the postcards are really beautiful things. Everyone has, you ask anyone, you know, what would they like to have in the future? They've got a good story about it, right? And those are the things that I think we all need to focus on. We all need to concentrate on not just telling these better stories about the future, but actively giving everyone agency in realizing those stories.
Thanks, Tom. I think I'll just finish by saying I think we just need to give everyone permission to be really brave and have really radical ideas, because, you know, what's been in the past is clearly not working, and so we just need to be able to break out of our shackles of constrained thinking. So I think on that note, we might call it a wrap. And I'd particularly like to thank Better Futures Australia and Lisa Cliff in particular for pulling all this together, and for the speakers today, Darren, Jess and Monica, and on Wednesday and on Monday. And just, you know, the numbers might not have been huge, but the great thing is it's all been recorded, and I think we will be promoting this and getting many more to listen in. And I think everyone's kind of facing Zoom fatigue as we close the year, but I think that there's just been such valuable and lovely discussions and ideas that will be resonating and inspiring people very much as we go forward. So thank you all, and go and get that beer and maybe go and sit outside in under a tree and celebrate, and not near a car.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Darren.
everyone.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Yeah.